Welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses, with your host, Jerry Gadori. And this week's guest is also Jerry Gadori. And here's why. It's been a while since we've talked about what brought me to this topic and to this program in the first place. And that's what I call the destination employer. So I wrote a book about it a couple of years ago. And in essence, it's how it is that your company develops the reputation in the marketplace as a location for top talent to 10x their careers. It's the way that you become the type of company that top talent wants to work with. The reason that's so important, especially if you're in technology services, is because that's your secret sauce. Your company, your team, your people, that's what you bring to the marketplace. If you're a technology staffing firm, your recruiters and your ability to access the market are your value. If you're a custom software development shop, the ability of your coders, of your developers to craft incredible software is your value. If you're an MSP providing IT services to small businesses, your field technicians' ability to solve problems and to create cost-effective ways for those small businesses to manage their IT infrastructure is the value you're bringing. The only thing different between you and your competitors is your team. Yeah, you might have a novel way to engage, a way to price that's different, and that certainly can be valuable. I'm not diminishing that. But the real key, the real thing is your team. So I came up with something called the destination employer. Now, the destination employer really is just the things within your company that you want to look at and make sure are on point in order to achieve that reputation that we described. So for those of you that are watching this on YouTube, I'm going to bring up a slide. But for those of you that are listening, I'm going to go ahead and talk through this as well. So the first thing that we want to look at as it relates to destination employer is this. The 12 key elements that we look at can be broken down into the 3 phases of the methodology. The 3 phases are attraction phase, recruitment phase, and retention phase. Said differently, attraction is, as it sounds, you being in the right place where your ideal candidate congregates with a compelling message as to why they should engage with you. It's how you put that bright beacon on the tallest tower so that your ideal candidate knows your name. When the time comes, and that time is ideally 3 to 6 months at least after you started that attraction, the next phase is recruitment. Recruitment, very simply, is not losing the attention of the people you fought so hard to get engagement from during attraction. It's basically creating the most efficient hiring processes possible so you don't lose the best. And then the most important, in my opinion, though frustratingly for me, the hardest thing to get owners to focus on is retention. And if you're a Dr. Stephen Covey fan like I am, and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you want to begin with the end in mind. And that's what retention is. Very simply, can we keep these people? Are they thriving in our organization? Remember, folks, it is much easier to fill a bucket than it is a colander. So focusing on retention is key. And the overall thread that ties these things together, you've heard me mention this very, very many times, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today, is our leadership process called the EFG leadership process. Engage, fulfill, and grow. Said shortly, because again, we're not going to dive into this here. If your team feels heard and valued or engaged with, and they like what they're doing and believe in the mission of the company, fulfillment, and they're consistently growing in their role, and ideally have the ability to grow into another role as time goes on, EFG, engage, fulfilled, and grow, then you are incentivizing them to stay. They have no reason to leave. Okay? So that's the EFG leadership process. Now, again, I've talked about that a million times in other places. Check my channel. We have whole videos on it. We're going to focus today on the destination employer methodology and its 3 components or phases: attract, recruit, retain. Now, the 12 key elements that comprise those 3 phases are company culture, hiring plans, DEI strategy, and employer branding. Those first 4 really map closest to attraction. More on that in a minute. The next 4 are employee referral program, job order intake, interview process, and offer process. Those map most closely to the recruitment phase. And then the final 4, new hire orientation, career planning and training, employee review, and exit interview process, map most closely to the retention phase. So first 4 map most closely to attraction, second 4 most closely to recruitment, and third 4 to retention. Having said that, all 12 of these, all 12, really are tied together and impact all 3 phases. The recruitment, retention, and attraction, those things are all part of an overall continuum. Excellence in one and poor performance in another will dramatically impact your outcome for the negative. The key here to remember is that retention impacts recruitment and attraction, just like attraction impacts recruitment and retention. So let's run through these 12 key elements. The first one I've listed is company culture. It obviously impacts your attraction, but I started with it because it's the most important part and one of the most elusive for a lot of companies that I've worked with over the decades that I've been doing this. First things first, your company culture isn't what you've got written on a pretty little plaque on your desk or hanging behind you in your office. Your company culture is what your team says about your organization when you're not around. When one of their friends or mentors or family members says, "Hey, what's it like working for XYZ company?" What they answer and what they talk about how working there functions is what your real company culture is. That true company culture has to show up in all of your marketing and all the things you talk about your company. Now, I'm going to go through the other 3 before we focus on attraction. Hiring plans ideally are something that you create annually and revisit quarterly. In a very rapidly changing organization, that might even be monthly. Why? Because if we establish our company employer marketing brands in the right places over enough time, we can access talent that's not superficial surface level. We can access the talent that ghosts in those forums and doesn't reply to every recruiter outreach. The third thing is DEI strategy. Very simply, people tend to go where they see themselves. And if they don't see themselves represented in your marketing, they probably are going to be less likely to respond to any recruitment outreach. For employer branding, let's spend some time here. Employer branding, very simply, is the combination of your marketing outreach, your company LinkedIn page, for example, your website, and the social media outreach of your leadership team and key folks within your organization. Those things together represent your employer brand. The modern candidate will very often research the people that they will be working with on sites like LinkedIn. So how those people represent themselves impacts your recruiter brand. So attraction phase, company culture, hiring plans, DEI strategy, and employer branding. The big question here, where do I plant my flag? The answer, very simply, in the places where your ideal candidate is likely to be. In this day and age, for many of us, that will be LinkedIn, but that's not the only place. Anywhere where those folks will be. So that might be, for example, associations that are important within your particular business vertical. It might be magazines or periodicals that associations or even private companies put out, again, that are important to your business vertical. So if you're a management consulting firm, maybe it's the Wall Street Journal, maybe it's Forbes, maybe it's something like that. If you're in technology, maybe it's LinkedIn, Maybe it's also a big conference or association within that set. If you're in government contracting, it could be associations like AFCEA, and there are many conferences they hold out throughout the year, or NDIA and the many conferences that they hold throughout the year. But wherever that is, you want to plant your flag there, and you want to create content relevant to the people that you are trying to attract. That is not you being quiet as a ghost, except for when you have a job to post. That's not what I'm describing. You're putting out articles, for example, we'll use LinkedIn as an easy example. You're putting out articles that are relevant to that candidate. So again, if they're technologists, maybe it's updates to whatever type of technology you have in your tech stack. Maybe it's changes in regulation. Maybe it's hot new career fields within that space. It's things of that sort, things that they value. Why? Because you want them to see you as a subject matter expert and start to pay attention to your output. Then, when time goes on of you consistently putting that out, you earn the right to give it to create an ask, which is to say to post your job order. And because you've attracted over time the attention of candidates that aren't necessarily the superficial candidates, that passive market, they are far more likely to respond because they value you. That's building your employer brand, and that's what the attraction phase is all about. The second phase, the recruitment phase, again, if I'm to oversimplify, is just not messing up what you started in an attraction. You want to create the shortest possible time between outreach and yes, no that you can, while still fully qualifying your candidates. Okay? Now, attraction should be a part of this, not just in creating the attention of that passive group that I talked about, but by also giving a real representation of what your true culture is and what it's like to work with your company. Now, if you're experiencing a lot of early stage churn, people leaving their first 3 months, this is probably your problem. If your employer brand represents one thing and working in your company represents another, when that person comes aboard, there's going to be a disconnect that will often cause them to bounce out of your organization. Now, the 4 elements that we talked about that are a big part of recruitment are your employee referral program, your job order intake, your interview process, and your offer process. Now, the first of those, the employee referral program, alongside your employer branding, should be a significant source of your overall candidate flow. If your employee referral program is not generating that, it's typically one of 2 problems. The first problem is that your people don't feel comfortable attaching their reputation to referring people to your company. Said differently, your company culture is broken and they don't want to potentially damage relationships by pulling friends, family, and colleagues into your team. That's a problem that quite obviously needs to be addressed yesterday. The second problem, and frankly the more common and much less scary, is that your employee referral program is either too complicated or not generous enough to be worth the effort. In most companies that I work with, the employer referral program is a checklist on the new hire orientation that never gets brought up again. And it's typically not generous enough to move people beyond entropy. It will be something I will never understand, that a company will pay a staffing firm $20,000 to fill a role, but they'll offer somebody on their team a $50 Starbucks card for doing the same thing. If it's not generous enough, people won't care. Now, the other 3 I'm going to put together, though they could be episodes on their own: job order intake, interview process, and offer process. Those 3 things combined give us the data we need to know what we're looking for, the job order intake, how that's going to work, the interview process, and then how we're going to inform the candidate of their selection, the offer process. A couple of quick notes here. Number 1, job order intake. I work predominantly in tech services, so maybe what I'm going to say now doesn't apply to you, though I suspect it might. Tech folks, if I'm generalizing, typically get involved in technology because they like making cool stuff, not because they like hiring people. So what happens more often than not is the technology manager will give a dated job order that they filled before for a new opening in their role and say to themselves, close enough. And that recruiter will waste a whole recruiting cycle generating candidates that are a match for the role that was given, not for the actual opening. And that manager won't seriously consider the opening until they're reviewing that first batch of resumes. Quite obviously, that's a waste of time, and it's potentially damaging to your employer brand because all those candidates are likely not a match. So the easiest way to fix this is to give whoever's doing your recruiting, internal or external, the authority to push back on job orders and make them be approved before they start working them. So that recruiter can look and say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Manager, this is verbatim the same rec you gave me 2 years ago. I know for a fact that your team composition has changed and your tech stack has changed. This job order doesn't work. The second part, interview process and offer process, I'm going to go right back to the beginning of today's episode and say the shorter period of time between a candidate submitting their resume and expressing interest in your role and you getting to yes, no, the more control you have over your process and the less likely you are to lose top talent. And the easiest way to do that is, number one, to make the most junior leader in your organization who's qualified to make that decision the person in charge, and assign the roles specifically of everyone who's going to interview or be a part of that hiring project, and make sure they know their role, they're competent in their role, and they're ready. If you do those things, you can minimize that time. If you're one of these companies that has 6, 7, 8, 9 week interview processes, you're bleeding talent and you're wasting everybody's time, period, full stop. The longer you go, the more likely you are to lose. And that brings me to the third step, retention. Now that we've hired that person, we need to make sure we're setting them up to stay. Now, one last note on recruitment. Part of what you should be doing in that process is making sure that your company culture, and I'll say again, your true company culture, not what you'd like it to be, but your company culture and the goals, values, and mission of that candidate are in alignment. If that person's personal mission is incongruent with yours, you're going to have a problem. I'll use a silly example. If the person is a pacifist that doesn't believe in violence, and you are a government contractor working with the DoD that designs weaponry, you probably have a problem. Silly example, I know, but when you'd be surprised how often, as someone who works in that space, that I come across. So you need to make sure that there's alignment. You also have to make sure that your role represents a logical next step in their career. The only answer shouldn't be, can they do this? It should also be, will this give them the opportunity to grow? In technology specifically, and again, I suspect in many other areas, but in technology specifically, if their skills become dated, they lose value in the market. So technologists will leave a job if they stagnate for too long. If you've got somebody that's already a 100% match for your job, then they probably should have been doing it a few years ago so they could grow to that point. So keep that in mind. Remember, EFG, the G is for growth. And that if they don't have the opportunity to do it with you, they're likely not going to stay for very long. So now in the retention phase, we want to take all that information that we've learned about that candidate and transfer it into their new hire orientation. This is an incredible opportunity because it's likely the first time that person has met their new manager as a manager and not as an interviewer and part of the process. And if that manager can come armed with a career plan based on what that person has told them in the interview process, as well as how they're going to help that candidate to grow as an employee in that company, then you're already light years ahead of your competition. So new hire orientation, just as it sounds, is transitioning that person from candidate to employee, and it's the critical first step in your retention strategy. The second step is career planning. I'm going to combine it with the third, which is employer review. Why? Because I do them together. They're separate things, but I do them in the same meeting. When I do an employee review, I not only go over the things that candidate is or isn't doing as it relates to my expectations as their manager, I also talk about the career plan and training program that we've designed during their new hire orientation. Why? Because that career planning is for them. I benefit from it, of course, but it's for them. Okay. The employee review is critical because we obviously need to make sure this person is developing in the way we need them to be successful. But the more that we can keep the language focused on what's in it for them, what they're getting out of it, and how they're progressing, the more attentive they will be. Done correctly, employee reviews are very valuable. Done incorrectly, it's a checkbox in a form that irritates everybody. You can tell if your managers are getting them done in 5 minutes and both people leave the room looking bored that you've got a bad program. Employee reviews / career planning and training sessions should be invigorating, or if there's a problem, they should be intense enough so people understand that there's something that needs to be resolved in order to keep moving ahead smoothly. And then the last step of retention is exit interviews. Now, you will see posted all over places like LinkedIn that exit interviews are a waste of time. And unfortunately, for most organizations, that's the truth. Here's the thing, folks. If you're running your team properly in the EFG leadership process, the G is the thing that will break. What I mean by that is this. What will happen typically within 3 to 5 years in technology is that their growth will start to stagnate and you won't have the next role for them. Rather than treating them like a thief that's stealing the family silver and climbing out a kitchen window, accept the fact that they're continuing to grow and advance in their career and you can't provide that advancement. All of that is to say, make the exit interview professional and positive so they leave your organization feeling good about you and become a goodwill ambassador for you out in the marketplace. Many positive things are gained by that step. The first thing is this. They may well be a boomerang employee. They go out there and now in their next advancement, you do have that open role and they come back to you and you've got a resource that you wouldn't have otherwise had. The second thing, and again, I see this in technology services all the time, where many of my clients run consulting firms, that person grows tired of a consulting lifestyle, so they go work for a company where they don't need to travel and do that part of the job. That company has need of an external consulting company to help them with something. Who do you think they recommend? I'll give you a hint. It's you. And then the third thing is they can be a referral for your open roles. You have a junior role open that they're clearly not a match for. But if one of their friends asks them about it, or if you reach out to them, or if they see it, they're very likely to remember how positive an experience it was working with you and to refer folks there. So an exit interview can be a gold mine. One step beyond the context of this episode and something I talk about in my book, Destination Employer, which you can pick up on Amazon or in our program, which you can check out at destinationemployer.co, is the alumni group. Alumni groups are an incredibly powerful tool that gets its start in your company and the culture you've built there, and then really gets its next step in the exit interview process. But I went pretty quickly over the 12 key elements that comprise the 3 phases, attract, recruit, and retain, of the Destination Employer methodology in our program. The reason I did it again is that this builds your company. In technology services, your team is your secret sauce. And if you can't attract the best, you're not ever going to be the best. I want to thank you, as always, for listening to this week's show. I look forward to talking to you again next week. And in the interim, continue being awesome.